thinking about the people in this floating world, far into the night, my eyes fill with tears. The poet Ryokan later wrote another poem. As I watch the children playing, without realizing it, my eyes fill with tears, bearing witness to the joys and sorrows of the world. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here, for the gift of your presence. Roshi used that line at UCLA when she did a talk there, and I just love it because I feel it really is a gift. I mean, you could have been watching The Sound of Music, which starts right about now. Special welcome to any of you who might be new to Great Dragon Mountain. Is anybody new? I think I recognize most faces. That means I'm preaching to the choir again. Yet we're all new, right? So here we are, start of December, the last month of the 2013 Ongo or practice period. I always call this the Sesshin season. We have Sesshin starting tomorrow evening, Ruwatsu Sesshin, which I'm really looking forward to, and then there will be another end-of-year Mukan Sesshin. And of course, it's the final month of the entire year, December 5th. Winter solstice, just 16 days away. A time of endings and a time of new beginnings. Isn't that exciting? I began with these probably lesser-known poems of Ryokan, who was a Zen priest. They happen to be two of my favorites, though. I'm a big Ryokan fan. In fact, on my next trip to Japan, I hope to use him as a theme. When I was on the pilgrimage with ZCLA in 2004, my wife Carla and I got to extend, and we did a Basho theme. So we visited all these Basho haunts. And in reading Ryokan, I see in a lot of his poems weeping and tears. And in this respect, I think that he and I are kindred spirits. A good book, a great film, a birthday card. I weep. I'm a major weeper. I can't take credit for those lines. That was Jude Law in the movie The Holiday, which was with Cameron Diaz, Kate Winslet, Jack Black. It was a love story. But, in all seriousness, Ryokan's humanity comes through his poetry, his struggles. And I think that's what endears so many of us to him. He's very, very popular in Japan. And I just happened to be finishing up another book on Ryokan, which Roshi had actually gave us the link to a month or so ago. It's called Kakurenbo, or The Whereabouts of the Zen Priest Ryokan, by Ido Francis Carney. And she writes about Ryokan and says, we identify with his struggle. This is almost what draws us to him. And yet, Ryokan is transcendent in his vow to live in the fashion of a hermit in the thatched hut Kogowan on Mount Kugami, huddled in a blanket, surrounded by heaps of snow in the black, dead, icy night of winter. Sounds like Antaiji, which is another monastery in Japan, kind of known for its inclement weather. And hopefully it's not shades of Ruwatsu Seishin. Maybe a little chilly here for those of us that will be here. Last night, I live in Los Osos up on the central coast by San Luis Obispo, and I had to have my stocking cap on the whole night when I went to bed. Same kind of cap that you see Roshi wear when we're out doing walking. Kakurenbo in Japanese means hide and seek. The game that the kids play. This was a favorite of his. And, as she says, serves as a metaphor for his life. And conceivably, she says, for all of our lives. Entering the gate and hiding, then coming out through the gate in the moonlight. As it were, we move in and out of experiences, trying to find ourselves, trying to find one another, as we thread in and out of awareness and states of realization. All of this seems to begin, she says, with the innocent game of peekaboo. What is it that fascinates babies, makes them laugh, holds their attention? What mythic game do we play in the search for the self that begins in the cradle? Now you see me. Now you don't. Look, I'm here. No, I'm over here. What are we getting ready for in such play? I have to throw one more poem in, because it is autumn, and he writes of autumn, "True, all the seasons have moonlit nights, but here's the best night to see the moon. The hills never so aloft, the streams never so clear. In the infinite blue of autumn sky flies a disk of light. Neither light nor gloom is graced with a life of its own. The moon and the earth are one, and myself one with them, bearing witness to the joys and sorrows of the world." Recently, I personally experienced some profound endings and profound beginnings. The poet William Butler Yeats wrote, "Things reveal themselves passing away." I'm a hospice chaplain, so I get to deal with those that are dying. And I found this to be very true. Now, this process of dying can occasionally offer an opportunity for transformation. Not always, but it can happen. I gave a talk last year, and I called it "When Death Comes," because that's the title of a Mary Oliver poem, which I read at the end of the talk. And in that talk, I told of a really amazing story from Stephen Levine, who deals with death and dying and hospice work, about one of his patients. This particular patient was, as he said, a real bitch on wheels. For her whole life, driving her family away and anyone that tried to befriend her. Then, and I'm shortening the story tremendously, she has an awakening. Actually experiences through visualization the pain and suffering of other women like her that were in tremendous pain. And she has a transformation. And suddenly the nurses are hanging out in her room on their breaks where they always avoided her before. She had a family that she reconnected with because she had driven them away, saw grandchildren she had never seen. I mentioned during that talk that I had a patient very similar to that. At that time, her story hadn't ended, but it has now. I was recently asked to lead a memorial service for Janet by her twin sister, Ellie. Janet was really a nasty person. She was from New York and had the stereotypic New York edge to her. She was really struggling with her sister. They lived together in a house in Los Osos, the same town that I'm from. Initially, when I was with her, I was doing guided meditations. It was going pretty well. And then, seeing the struggles the sisters were having, I actually introduced counsel that we use here to help facilitate discussions. But they were still barely able to talk to one another. It was gratifying to find out later on that they had actually taken counsel with their estranged family to try to reconnect. And they used counsel. But, as I said, she was pretty nasty. She ended up firing, quote unquote, most of the hospice people that came to see her. Social worker didn't want to see. The aides didn't want to see. Chaplain got fired too. She did keep our musician Chris, but on certain terms, her terms. I want sad music. I want it on a specific instrument. He plays many. He's also a great storyteller. And she wanted him to tell stories. But certain stories. He couldn't read them. They had to be memorized. And no morals. No stories with morality. Well, Janet's cancer progressed. And I kind of kept tabs on what was going on because we have team meetings. So we hear from the nurse and I heard from Chris. Chris, it was very funny. He was always on edge when he was going to go to see Janet. He says, I was memorizing the stories on my trip, on driving up there. Well, she had breast cancer, developed just a huge tumor on her breast. And I mean huge. We're talking football size. Began oozing. The odor was horrific. Even our most experienced hospice nurse was out there, and she said, tough to be in the same room. Pretty tough. And she continued to be more and more at odds with her sister, who was her caregiver. Eventually, I heard that she was no longer going to be able to stay at home, and she went to a skilled nursing facility. So I saw my chance. I don't like to get fired. One of the other chaplains, Berkeley, it was this particular skilled nursing facility was his facility, his kind of territory, if you will. So he went in to see Janet. And he came back with a completely different story. I said, really? That's amazing. So I took the opportunity to check in on Janet. And I used the excuse saying, yeah, I'm just making my rounds, heard you were here, so I stopped in to see you and say hi. Transformation. Not the same Janet. Not the bitch on wheels. She was cordial, engaging, and we talked a lot about her dying. She had really come to terms with it. She said, I'm okay with this now. She said, I've stopped fighting. I'm not attached to this. And I remember the words, all is well. She had a good death. we had a good memorial service. What was especially touching about it is that her twin sister, Ellie, had asked me to do the rock ceremony. And I had to call her back and I said, Ellie, the rock ceremony? What's that? I said, yeah, that stuff that we were doing where we passed the rocks. Those were the talking pieces we were using. It was council. So here we were in memorial service, went into council, and her friends shared the stories about Janet. As it happens, I also experienced some other good deaths. They're not always good. Some other good deaths in a very short amount of time. And in that same week, I experienced some good births. Our oldest daughter, Allison, gave birth to twins, and she lives in Austin. Two beautiful girls, Amelie and Vivian. Those are French names. The husband is French. They're our 6th and 7th grandchildren. Can you believe that? I don't think I look old enough to have 7 grandchildren. Oh, I do? It's so much for population control in the Bloodgood clan. Carla, my wife, has been there for a couple weeks now. This will be her 3rd week. She'll come home Saturday. I got to go last week. I tell you, it was almost as tough as a session schedule. We took shifts. I'm an early morning person, so I took the 4 a.m. shift. And what a routine. Allie had it down. Take one baby. She was breastfeeding. She'd be breastfeeding the baby. And then we're still trying to give, she wanted to give supplemental milk in a bottle that she had pumped. And so then she would hand off one baby to me. I would be feeding the baby. After that's done, burping the baby. And after that's done, changing diapers. In the meantime, she's picked up the other baby, put her up to her breast, and we do the same routine. I get her, put the bottle in, and she finishes the bottle, burping, diaper. About that time, she has a 2-year-old son, Mark Oliver. Mark Oliver gets up, comes in pretty close to the same routine. Bottle, don't have to burp him, and diapers. A little more difficult to do changing a diaper of a 2-year-old than a newborn. A little stinkier, too. But I will have to say, having worked with the geriatric crowds, it's probably a little nicer than working with the geriatrics and changing their diapers. And by the way, I got a lot of kakurenbo in, hide and seek, with my grandson. What a gift to be there, holding babies, sometimes 2. And you know, they were at an age, it's early on, where they're looking out, and you are gazing into their eyes. And I don't know how many of you have experienced that, either with your family, children, or perhaps your own children. It's an incredible feeling. So I weep. So here it is in this short course of a week, death and birth, birth and death. And of course, the Buddhist in me arises. The big questions come up. Janet, where are you going? What, if anything, continues? Where goes your karma? And then with the newborns, Amelie and Vivian, where have you come from? What karma do you bring? How will your life play out? The Heart Sutra, no old age and death, and no end to old age and death. And there's another line, not in that, but it's another from another sutra. Because a Buddha is in birth and death, there is no birth and death. It is also said, because a Buddha is not in birth and death, a Buddha is not deluded by birth and death. If there's no birth and death, then what's going on here? What do you think? The poet Mary Oliver, in one of her poems, says, "I want to be full of curiosity. What will it be like, that cottage of darkness?" And I'm very curious. So, of course, I wanted to explore then what came up for me with all this experience, this karma, birth, rebirth. That can be a pretty challenging concept for we Westerners. We're not used to that. Most of us, of course, come from the Judeo-Christian background, where that is, in many cases, frowned upon, sacrilegious. In the East, of course, it's been a part of their culture for a long, long time, for centuries. But I know that if we want to understand Buddhism, if we want to understand our lives, we must come to terms with it on some level. And I look at this whole thing as kind of a koan. I guess life's a koan, huh? I really connected. There's one of the books that I used for research was Jack McGuire's Essential Buddhism, A Complete Guide to Beliefs and Practices. He wrote, because Buddhism denies the lasting nature of anything personal, it's nearly impossible for an individual, Buddhist or non-Buddhist, to grasp the concept of rebirth in an intellectual way. As with most other teachings in their religion, Buddhists can come to understand rebirth only by taking it within. That is, meditating on it, studying it in an intimate teacher-student relationship, and above all, living with it on a day-to-day basis so that it is realized, made real. The law of karma, technically it's the Sanskrit word karma vipaka, action, result. Our thoughts and feelings determine what we do. Our deeds have consequences, and the results influence our minds. The cause and effect are, of course, are pretty easy to see in this life and in our experience, day-to-day experience. I pull out a propane tank from my barbecue and smash my thumb against the barbecue, lose the nail, and it takes 6 months to get it even close to being back to normal. Ouch. You commit a crime, you get caught, you go to jail. You commit an act of heroism, and you get praise. You practice to be a quarterback over and over and over, passing the ball. And Jotai practices to be a wide receiver. He goes long, I pass. The ball connects with his hands. We win the game. You get that. It's the deeper implications that may be harder to understand. That karma carries over lifetimes through rebirth after rebirth after rebirth. And what of collective karma? the interconnectedness of groups and whole nations. What do the ancients have to say about this? What does Buddha have to say about it? What does Dogen have to say about it? What do some of the modern masters have to say about it? In Buddha's time, it's very much a Hindu culture in India. Reincarnation was a deeply held belief. That was the norm. And I've heard even modern day scholars talk about rebirth and reincarnation kind of as being one. McGuire, in his book, the one I'd mentioned just previously, he said this can kind of be a stumbling block to understanding. He says reincarnation refers to the transmigration of a soul or personal imprint from one life to another. Thus, a key element of an individual's ability travels from one carnal body to another carnal body. Hence, reincarnation. Now, Buddha didn't reject this idea about an individual progressing in some manner over time. In fact, we hear, and some of us have read the Jataka tales of his many, many previous lives before he became Buddha. The significant change that he made from Hinduism was to deny that a separate factor as a soul, a self, or personal imprint gets passed along. He said that the quality of one life determines the quality of the next one. But the relationship between the two doesn't involve another kind of transference. Some of this is pretty tough to grasp, right? Especially for Westerners. John Snelling is the past Secretary General of the Buddhist Society, offers an analogy, which I found interesting. He said it is rather like a billiard ball flying across the green of a billiard table. It hits another ball, and that cannons on at a speed and in a direction that owes something to the first ball, and also to other incidental factors, he says. I think there's some physics going on there. But it does not take away anything material or essential from the first ball. Another analogy is the transmission of a flame from one candle to another. I hear that one quite often. So what did Buddha himself say? Rebirth arises from two causes. The last thought of the previous life as a governing principle, and the actions of the previous life as the basis. The stopping of the last thought is known as decease, the appearance of the first thought, rebirth. Now, I've heard the word habits used to explain this. I'm a little more comfortable with habits because I have many of them. And there's an Englishman who actually became a monk in Thailand. His name is Ajahn Amaro. And he says, what is reborn is our habits. That is the essence of it. Whatever the mind holds on to is reborn. What we love, hate, fear, adore, and have opinions about. Our identification with these aspects of mind has a momentum behind it. Attachment is like a flywheel. What is being reborn from life to life is that in us which identifies with objects blindly. How about Dogen? There is a simple way to become a Buddha. when you refrain from unwholesome actions, are not attached to birth and death, and are compassionate toward all sentient beings, respectful to seniors, and kind to juniors, not excluding or desiring anything, with no designing thoughts or worries, you will be called a Buddha. Do not seek for anything else. Sometimes they're mixed messages. Sometimes it's kind of tough to understand. How do you understand it? The one I love is the emperor asked Zen master Gudo, what happens to a man of enlightenment after death? How should I know? Because you are a master, answered the emperor. Yes, sir, said Gudo, but not a dead one. Roshi John Daido Lori passed away a few years ago. Had a comment about it. What is it that dies? Do you ask yourself that question? He says there is no question that when this physical body is no longer capable of functioning, the energies within it, the atoms and the molecules it is made up of, don't die with it. They take on another form, another shape. You can call that another life, but there is no permanent, unchanging substance. Nothing passes from one moment to the next. Quite obviously, nothing permanent or unchanging can pass or transmigrate from one life to the next. Being born and dying continues unbroken, but changes every moment. Life and death are nothing but movement. So those are some Buddhist ideas. In modern science, physicists like David Bohm have demonstrated that two subatomic particles, once they have interacted, can respond to each other over thousands of years later. And that particles and people alike may influence each other, since everything in the universe is connected. He has a whole theory about it. It's called implicate order. The theory of implicate order. I tried to grasp that. It was pretty tough. Many years ago, our Roshi had a program, A Year to Live, that was based on the work of Stephen Levine. And he has a book of that same title, and you kind of live an entire year as if it was your last year. In one of the segments, she gave a synopsis of Yasutani Roshi's, and I believe Roshi was an unpublished work, the 8 Beliefs in Buddhism. We have it in our library. Highly recommend it. Great stuff. Really a whole class. You could have a whole class or workshop on just that. Some of it's a little complicated. Charts and graphs. He attempts to present the problem of eternal life according to the explanations written in these 2 heavy-duty philosophical books on Buddhism, the Kusha and the Yushiki. And he says, typically it takes 9 years to thoroughly understand Kusha and 3 years to master the second book, Yushiki. It's almost like trying to master Shobogenzo Dogen's work. But he speaks of our Buddha nature from 8 different perspectives. And I love the imagery he uses of the waves and ocean. And this I was able to kind of resonate with and connect with. The ocean and each individual is a wave on the surface of the ocean. Apart from water, no wave can exist. Apart from Buddha nature, no individual can exist. Wave is another name for this water, and each individual is another name for Buddha nature. Chris, the storyteller, the musician that I told you about, used one story that was acceptable to Janet. It was called the Salt Boy story. When he told it to Janet, it was the Salt Girl story. There was a child that was made of salt, completely made of salt, but very much wanted to know where he had come from. So he set out on a long journey, traveled to many lands in pursuit of this understanding, and finally he comes to the shore of a great ocean. How marvelous, he cries, and stuck one foot into the water. The ocean further beckoned him and said, "If you wish to know who you are, do not be afraid." The salt child walks further and further into the ocean, and of course he's dissolving with each step, and finally at the end exclaims, "Ah, now I know who I am." In that same work, Yasutani talks about karma, the law of causation. Another image about the waterfall. A waterfall looks like one great mass of water, but actually, as we know, it's composed of an infinite number of droplets. It's constantly changing according to its composition. So there's no specific entity called the waterfall. And there's a note at the bottom of one page, continuous sweep like a waterfall. The seed reveals the present action. The present action impresses itself on the seed. The triangle is completed. Cause and effect are one. I worked with Roshi on a koan a while back called Tokusan Carries His Bowls. A pretty well-known koan. And in the case, there's a line, "Great Tokusan though he is, he has not yet realized the last word." And it's really sweet to see this whole scenario is there's Tokusan and then there's another monk that are trying to help Seipo with his awakening, their own bodhisattva vows. Ganto was the other monk. So, during an exchange with Roshi, because this was talking about the first word and the last word, they have a beautiful verse that connects this. And she said, "So what is the first word in Zen?" What is it? Seeing that I was sitting across from her with looking like a deer in the headlights, she finally told me, "Emptiness." And then asked, "So what's the second word?" Well, once I got emptiness, I said, "Okay, I'm in tune here." Form. Heart Sutra. They only talk about the first and last word in the koan. She said, what's the third word? But then I was piecing things together. Function. As I was doing that, I kind of pieced, and this may be a stretch, but as we were talking, I realized some kind of a connection with the three pure precepts from the Zen peacemaker order, which are not knowing, witnessing the joys and sorrow of the universe, and loving or appropriate action. So the not knowing kind of connected with emptiness in my mind, and the bearing witness to form, and then the function to action, loving action or appropriate action. Do you see that? Maybe that's a stretch. Maybe Shōgen doesn't know what he's talking about. But throughout the koans, there's this common theme, again and again, of these monks helping others with their awakening. And of course, isn't that what we're all about? That's what the teachers are all about, is to help us with our awakening. And of course, it's the Bodhisattva vow that we chant every day. Maizumi Roshi had a comment on all of this. Jan Chosenbeis writes in her book Jizo Bodhisattva about Maizumi. He was asked if something continues after death. Maizumi Roshi replied, no. It is the vow that continues. This vow stands beyond any notion of fame or continuity, because the vow of the Bodhisattva is fully lived and cannot be saved up from the past of a portion or apportioned for the future. It is, as Chosenbeis said, a propelling energy. It propels us into the search for an end to suffering and into finding ways to help others. There can be no suggestion of concern for the small self in it. The Korean master Shōgen, who was a contemporary of Maizumi and a friend, said, can you use your karma to help other beings? Or does your karma use you? Can you use your karma to help other beings? Or does your karma use you? Can you? Zen master Shōgen has a wonderful book, The Compass of Zen. And I found his work, or his chapter on karma, to be, it's more simple than a lot of the other things that I read. A little more graspable, understandable. But in the reading, he's assuming that you're really kind of connected with the world of Buddhism and cosmology. In particular, the 6 realms of existence. Is everybody here kind of with that, or do you know what they are? Buddhist cosmology? Okay, just in a nutshell then. Buddhist cosmology were traditionally conceived as real places, but they can also be interpreted symbolically. And you'll hear us in chants. Gate of Sweet Nectar deals with hungry ghosts. So there are 6 levels. There's a heaven realm, a Sura realm where the Titans live, a human realm where we live, an animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and the hell realm. And that's a whole nother talk. But just know that that's kind of the Buddhist cosmology. So he's talking about that. The human realm is actually the coolest because that's where you can have awakening. Heaven realm sounds pretty nice, but you get there because of all your good acts, your good karma, but eventually that burns out and you have to go through the whole thing again. So that's what that's about. He has chapter headings, and they're great, and they're understandable and very simple. And it gives a little synopsis of each chapter. So this one on karma has Bodhisattva karma, complete compassion. Good karma, happiness. Bad karma, suffering. Accumulated karma, predispositions. In one of his sections, he said, we already spoke about good karma and bad karma. If you do good things every day, you make good karma and you get happiness. If you do bad things, you make bad karma and get suffering. He said his primary school teacher in Korea always used to say, every day do one good action. He said, saying and hearing that are very easy, but accomplishing it is very difficult. Just look at what you do every day. But most important is not making good and bad in your mind and only focusing all your energy on finding your true self and helping others. Just keep the question, who am I? And soon everything will become clear. Of course, he doesn't say what soon is. Some of us have been doing this for many, many years. So how does that grab you? What do you think about? How do you take this? As I said, it feels to me like a koan, and sometimes you can't grasp things intellectually. Certainly koans you cannot. We often talk about the three pillars: great faith, great doubt, great perseverance, or great effort. Sometimes as I chew on this, there's a lot of doubt that arises. I take a lot on faith, looking to the ancestors, people that have done this for centuries and centuries. And the last story I wanted to tell, I'm not going to have time to tell, which is very sad. So I wanted to go to a koan that kind of represents all of this. But I'll do that another time. So Zen is said to be based on special transmission outside scriptures, which don't stand upon words. Now, I'm an insatiable reader and a collector of books. Once Roshi admonished me that if I had so much time to read, that I should probably take that time and sit more. Now, I rationalized the reading saying, well, I don't have a degree in Eastern religion and philosophy, so that's mostly what I'm reading. So forget all the babbling that I've done this evening and just go sit more. and I hope there is enough water in the Pacific for you to rinse out my words from your ears. We heard Dharma Joy say that in October at his Shuso Hosan. You just heard me say it, and you will hear me say it one more time in October. So I thank you for your indulgence. Questions? Comments? Dylan.
Thank you very much for that. I'm a lot like you, and I should sit more than I read, but I can't stop reading. And karma and rebirth is one of my favorite things to read about, because I have no idea really what it is. And I can go to books and it'll tell me, but I've asked a question here, no one says anything, So I just really enjoyed that, and I don't know, it's just something, it just freezes me when I'm listening to it or reading about it. It's just so engaging for me, and thank you for addressing it and opening it up. I really appreciate it.
And now you're more confused than ever.
It's just the same as I was. I guess. What's your experience with sitting with the question of birth and death and reincarnation? If you don't mind me asking.
Don't mind you asking. Probably don't have a good answer for you. It just is. I mean, I'm living with it every day. I don't have a good answer for you.
What do you tell people that are dying when they ask you what's going to happen to me?
Well, as a chaplain, we're there to support whatever the faith tradition is. So it really depends on who the person is and what their tradition is. And I've been kind of a student of religion for so long. I feel pretty comfortable with, whatever the religion may be. And if I don't have an answer, then I know who to go to kind of get answers that may apply directly to them. And if it's a Buddhist, and I've had Buddhists, in fact, I'm shocked at how many Buddhists there are. Not that Buddhists don't die, but up in San Luis Obispo, it's not a huge segment of the population. But we go into things just like this. And more often than not, do a lot of guided meditations. Stephen Levine, Joan Halifax have just these wonderful programs. Do a lot of this with the the inmates at CMC. A lot of these guys, there's a whole group that are hospice workers. They're trained hospice workers that are going into the hospital in the prison. And so teaching them guided meditations. Yeah, pretty amazing stuff.
What is guided meditation? What is guided meditation?
Well, there's many different kinds, but basically you've got somebody that's actually reading or guiding the meditation. So you're not just on your own. There's so many different types of meditation. Here, we tend to start with the breath counting. Some of us are doing koan works with these. Are you familiar with any of this? I'll talk to you afterwards. Or shikantaza, which means just sitting, which is pretty tough. With the inmates, a lot of times with short attention spans, a little easier to do guided meditations where you're kind of directing them as they go. And Dylan, your question, I'm sure I didn't give you a good answer, but it reminded me. My yoga teacher just went to a workshop with Krishna Das. You know Krishna Das?
Yeah,
You've heard of him?
Yeah, singer.
He does chanting, Hindu tradition.
Right.
He's kind of the rock star of yoga, they say.
Right. Yeah.
And it was also with Sharon Salzberg, who's a very well-known insight meditation teacher. And so Krishna Das was being asked a question by one of the students. And of course, as my yoga teacher was telling me, he said, he's just a guy. He's very laid back. He doesn't present himself as some holier-than-thou teacher with all the answers. But she'd asked him, I've been a very good practitioner. I meditate every day. I do yoga every day. I eat right and offer service to others. I read a lot about the practices, and I'm wondering why things aren't moving faster for me. wine, wine, wine. And Krishna Das sighs. And he says, well, it's like this. When you're covered with shit, you're covered with shit till it falls off. So don't give up, was the gist of it. He says, keep doing what you're doing, keep practicing. And actually says, until the picture becomes clear and you have to look through the shit. And he gave a big smile and a nod. And that was it.
I like Krishna Das.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did the cookies arrive?
They're waiting.
Okay, good. By the way, they're vegan cookies this evening. That was a gift from Dharma Joy, who does much of our cookie baking. And it was very nice. I'm vegan, so that was very nice of him to do that. But not necessary. And I'm not attached to it. But I'm going to eat them.